Welcome to
Jay!
welcome to another episode of Hat Guys Talk Books.
Woohoo!
These things tend to
We are
happen.
we are men with hat problems and writing addictions who also read things.
Writing addictions, reading addictions, hat problems. Oh my gosh, we're just a mess. And one of these days I need to actually comb my hair before I put a hat on.
Why? Why bother? The hat uncombs the hair.
That's why God made hats.
That's right.
That way I don't have to comb my hair. Dan, what should we talk about today?
Oh, we were talking about H.P Lovecraft, and we thought, hey, wait, this could go on the show. Terrifying who it is.
H.P Lovecraft always reminds me of Paul Cooley because of his book, The Black, and he's got those black tentacles on the cover. And it's like, did he get that from Lovecraft? But Lovecraft,
at least indirectly, I would assume he had to have.
Oh, had to have. But Lovecraft, he's inspired a lot of. Yeah, I've got like all his works right here. You know, I'm a weird collector, and
I didn't even know there was a single volume.
This is a hefty book. This is like
he died when he was like 35, and he started writing when he was in his 20s, and he wrote
an incredible amount in that short period
on a little manual typepwriter.
Yes, and that's something that boggles my mind. And we'll get back to Lovecraft in a moment. Is people that sit down at a computer and complain about having to type 1,000 words a day.
I know, right?
These guys were typing 3,000 to 5,000 words a day, as you said, on a manual typewriter. And if they made a mistake, they just kept on going. Mm-hmm. Somebody else was going to correct it later on down the line. They weren't going to. They just kept on moving. And here you can just backspace and keep on typing. Yep. At any rate, I digress, as I tend to do. I honestly can't recall when I discovered the mythos of Lovecraft. I believe it was while playing Dungeons and Dragons with friends in high school that we started talking about Cthulhu because it was one of the Metallica songs. Mm-hmm. But they did the Call of Cthulhu with a K. Why, I don't know. I don't know if they didn't have the copyright for the name.
At the time, there was a big dispute going on about whether the mythos was in the public domain or not.
Yes.
Arkham House was trying to claim everything, even though quite a bit of it was written before 1926 or whatever the cutoff date was. And it was a very dumb and long-lasting lawsuit. It only got resolved a few years ago.
Yeah, I want to say that at the time Metallica came out with the song, it was the life of the author plus 30 years. And because of Disney has been continually extending that life of copyright.
Yeah, it looks like they're not going to this time. Thank fuck.
Oh, I Mickey and Minnie and Pluto aren't as popular as they once were. Let them go.
That's right.
Let them be in the public domain. I think it was more
our culture back. I mean, as a writer, I'm happy that we have stupidly long copyrights, but frankly, life of the author plus 20 years is the most anyone should even hope for, because that's enough time for if your partner's pregnant when you die, the income can help your child get to adulthood. And there's just no reason for beyond that.
And if your child knows anything about copyright and properties, they could repurpose the property. Mm-hmm. And immediately, boom, copyright kicks back in again because they repurposed the property.
Right.
Much like Brian Herbert with the Dune series. Mm-hmm. He's continued that series on. So it'll be a long time before any of that falls into the public domain. But the interesting thing about...
the original book will fall into the public domain, but Brian and Kevin have so explored the surrounding idea space that the idea of someone doing spin-offs is going to be kind of a non-starter, because they're going to have to worry about stepping on those toes. So the most you're going to get is people doing annotated editions of Dune of the original 6.
Yep. Or they can take the characters and put them in another setting type of thing. Mm-hmm. Or write ancillary stories around the universe, that type of thing.
Right.
That's interesting about, I mean, we haven't even touched on Lovecraft yet, but as long as we're talking about copyright and the life of the author, one of the interesting things, we mentioned this on one of the earlier episodes, I backed a goodly number of Kickstarters over the years. Gosh, pretty much since Kickstarter's been around.
I love you for it.
Yes. I feel like I should start a TikTok of, here's the latest Kickstarter I backed. I'd have one every freaking day. Um, but
It would be a
a,
popular channel.
probably a lot of people on Kickstarter have taken the Cthulhu mythos and just had a blast with it.
Oh yeah.
Not just Cthulhu. There was one that they wrote a wrestling comic with Cthulhu as a professional wrestler, and I'm like,
Nice.
I don't know if I want to. Yes, I'm going to back this, but why? Why? What are they doing? Baby Cthulhu is hysterical. I mean, you get a little
Mhm.
baby Cthulhu with a pacifier under all those tentacles walking around. It's like, okay, this
Mhm.
is insane. But people just have fun with it. And now people are making graphical novels based off of the stories and
Yep.
dropping them out there. They're not so much expanding, but enhancing what came before. And I find
Mhm.
it fascinating what people are doing with it. But
It's incredibly rich, and Lovecraft knew he in some of his letters, I think once to Robert E. Howard, he said that he was deliberately making the mythos self-contradictory because all great mythic traditions, from the Bible to Greek myths and whatnot, do not have a unified narrative, and the contradictions between the different story traditions in those mythoses, he was convinced, are one of the things that made them so fertile and so sticky mentally. And so he deliberately employed that tactic in the own Cthulhu stories. So you get Cthulhu and Dagon and all of the other old ones that show up in like the Shadow over Innsmouth and the Call of Cthulhu and at the Mountains of Madness, and it's never quite coherent, but it's so powerful and so sticky. It's fantastic what he was able to pull off.
I think one of the funnest things about Lovecraft and some of his stories is the language. It's
Mm.
it's not your pulpy goodness from back in the day. He's very deliberate with the way he words
Mhm.
things and carries an idea
It
across.
Oh yeah, it's incredibly florid and it's incredibly sophisticated, and makes he uses the inability to describe something to describe it very well. And what I really love about it is he proves Stephen King's whole thesis about effective writing totally wrong. And of course, Stephen King was heavily influenced by Lovecraft, and the books of his that have done the best and that have been adapted into the most successful films are almost all direct Lovecraft ripoffs. But King talks about how you have to use a simple, direct vocabulary. You can't use adverbs, and of course, Lovecraft is lousy with that stuff.
Oh, he loves
Eh,
using, uh, although it's flowery language, there's not a lot of flowers in the books. A lot of it
No,
is very dark and grim
it
and
really is,
foggy and
and oh yeah.
atmospheric.
And the way he uses language too is he knew his Shakespeare and he knew his poetic meter. When you hear the stuff read aloud, it
Yes.
the rhythm of the words hammers on you and it drives you nuts the same way the characters are being driven nuts.
He uses meter the same way Poe does.
Yes, very
He
much so.
very much is comparable, in my opinion, to Poe, because Edgar
Yeah, I
Allan
think that's a
Poe
good call.
was writing more life like horror stuff that could actually happen in real
Hmm.
life. And
It
then he
was either
began,
lifelike or dreamlike, and Lovecraft
yes,
is a whole different thing.
Lovecraft is very much building his own, like I said, he's building a mythos, and he's building a
Hmm.
self-contradictory mythos that doesn't make logical sense when he starts to talk about the old ones. And you're like, what?
Do you know how he came up with that? Don't you?
I do not.
He after reading Darwin, Nietzsche, and keeping up on current cosmology was a big thing of his. He became convinced that civilization was about to or at least culture was about to unravel because humans could not emotionally handle the vastness of the universe. And so as the awareness of deep time and the vastness of the universe seeped in and destroyed religion, it was going to leave people naked without protection in before the sheer immensity of the cosmos. It was like the Douglas Adams parodied this idea in the Total Perspective Vortex, right? And and he and Lovecraft came to the conclusion that no horror was adequate to encapsulate the sheer insignificance of man before an indifferent universe. And so he came up with the old ones as an embodiment of this indifference. They don't want to kill us. They don't want to destroy us. They simply do not give a shit.
Yep.
And their sheer indifference is an existential threat.
And I think that's a fascinating, obviously, spoiler alert, because the story's been out there forever. But Cthulhu, the end of Cthulhu, when they find this ancient god that's coming up off the bottom of the ocean and just starts to walk, doesn't even acknowledge that they're there, just starts to walk past them and knocks their boat over and just goes about his business. He could care less if they're there or not. And that's exactly what you're saying, is the old gods exist. They may or may not even know that we're around, but they just don't care that we're around. And I find that absolutely fascinating. And it's not just that one story. It's like I said, it carries over from story to story.
And the things that it's inspired. I mean, the artistic world today would look nothing like it does without Cthulhu, or without Lovecraft in general.
Oh, absolutely.
Everything from, like I said, the total perspective vortex in Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, which is straight out of Lovecraft and is actually almost a direct ripoff of the music of Eric Zahn, which is my favorite Lovecraft story. And to The Thing, which is itself a retelling of the Mount. Well, it's based on a book, Who's There, by John Campbell, I think it was, wrote it, and that was a retelling of At the Mountains of Madness. Then the Alien series, also the first Alien film, is also a retelling of At the Mountains of Madness. Of course, Stephen King's The Mist.
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
And everything, body horror, creature horror, and the way that has all taken shape is all straight from Lovecraft.
Well, look straight at Pirates of the Caribbean. The ghost pirates would not exist without Cthulhu. As soon as I saw the tentacled face, I'm like, oh my god, that's Cthulhu in human form. It was hysterical. It's like, yeah, that imagery would not exist were it not for Lovecraft. And a lot of people, I feel, owe a great debt to what he did. I realize he's a controversial individual for some of his views, and yeah, I see you rolling your eyes because it's
well,
there.
yeah. But let's dive into it. Okay, so let's set this up with a bit of backstory. Lovecraft was one of those 19th century shut-ins like Emily Dickinson, right? He raised in a really repressive and yet privileged environment where he wasn't really allowed to develop as a human being.
Nope.
And then upon the death of his mother, whom he had this sort of weird emotionally incestuous relationship with because of how he was shut in, he found himself in a world that he wasn't prepared for and didn't understand, and he was reflexively terrified of and disgusted by everything. And one of those things that he was reflexively terrified of and disgusted by were Jews, because there weren't many of them around, and they were alien, and they dressed weird, and they smelled funny because they had a different diet. And he was a blazing racist, as you would expect from someone with this kind of background.
Yep.
What's interesting is he considered his racism a character flaw. And it shows up in his private papers. He considered it an expression of his own deep weakness as a person. But he couldn't get past it until much later in life after, well, late. He died very young, but he did get married pretty young, and then like Poe, his wife died. But through his relationship with her, he kind of found his way past the racism late in life, and the character of his stories changes a little bit at the very end because of it.
Yep.
But the racism does show up in the stories on a top level occasionally. But one of the interesting things is that he does the thing that really great artists do, which is that he takes his own weakness and he transforms it into something universally relatable and interesting because he had such a highly developed disgust sensitivity, which is one of the bases of racism, one of the deep emotional bases of racism, is and xenophobia. He took that and transmuted it into this horror of the strange and alien and incomprehensible, which of course is something everybody has at some level. It's deep bred into us over evolutionary time because that thing which is incomprehensible and over there might be something that wants to eat you, or it might be carrying a disease, which is the evolutionary basis of outgroup xenophobia. And it's something we carry with us on some level in our genes. And we don't have a lot of good cultural software to deal with it in a cosmopolitan society, which is one of the reasons that in cosmopolitan societies, really weird horror is a big thing. Because he kind of wrote the cultural software that allows us to deal with these weird feelings and reactions that our current environment doesn't really have a place for.
If you look at some of the way he, as you said, he does it in some of his works where he demonizes people, but they're completely monstrous versus being, say, a Negro or a
Mhm.
Jew or another race. They're just a
Yeah,
monster.
like he was like what? Who's the one? Uh, there's the Mad Turk. I can't remember the name of the Mad Turk, but oh, talk about a great villain. Yeah, racist stereotype, but a great villain.
Yep.
And I wish I could remember his name because he was fantastically drawn and so strange. But anyway,
But where I was going with that is some of the work that he did to demonize other races, I believe, were used as propaganda for war much later on. World War II, you saw a lot of propaganda
wouldn't
come
be
out
surprised.
where basically they turned the enemy into literal monsters. I
Hmm.
mean, look at some of the Disney that's been banned because of the cartoons with the
Yep.
very racist, stereotypical Japanese and
Hmm.
Chinese. It's like, whole. I've gone back
And the
and looked at
Germans
some of these.
in those cartoons too.
Oh, very much so,
Yeah.
very much. Not even just over stereotypical, but just you're like, how did anybody look at this and think, yeah, another human could actually be like that? Um,
Which of
it's
course was the point, right? It was to
yes,
dehumanize them.
exactly, and I think that's what Lovecraft did with some of his stories was took that dehumanization to the nth degree.
Hmm.
Um, the one where he's
Yeah.
riding on the bus and realizes he's going through changes and he ends up coming a monster himself.
Yeah,
And
that's
he
in
realized
Shadow over Innsmouth, I
Shadow.
think.
I was
Yeah.
thinking of that one. I'm like, is that the one? But yeah, where he realizes he's half and half, and he's
Uh-huh.
converting to the other half, which is actually a monster, and he hates
Hmm.
that about himself until he accepts that, well, this is who I am,
Yep.
and now I'm the monster.
And
And
to read, and yeah, it as a story on its own, it's amazing. To read that in the context of knowing his own personal relationship to his racist thoughts
yep,
and how they changed over his life makes it a whole different read too.
absolutely, and that's kind of where I was going with it. He was controversial, but as you said, he understood what it was going on in his mind. And it wasn't that he was like, hey, I hate this specific race because I hate that race for no other reason than I hate that race. He knew, hey, I was raised to not understand anybody else. I'm really having a problem with this. I want to think that if he had survived longer, he would have overcome that. And
Well,
he
like I
would,
said, he certainly was on the way to doing so,
I doubt he
judging
would
by his
ever
correspondence.
apologize. Yeah, I doubt he would have ever apologized for who he
Probably
was.
not.
He would have just evolved as a
Yeah.
person, which hopefully everyone does as,
Hmm.
as they grow and mature and they realize, hey, these deep rooted beliefs I have that are overtly racist or overtly homophobic, whatever, they have no
Hmm.
basis in reality other than in your own head.
Hmm.
Um, Not that I'm going to get all woke up in here, but
Well, I'm deeply opposed to judging one age by the standards of another for the same reason that, you know, Western chauvinist though I am, child of the Enlightenment though I am incredibly opposed to judging one culture by the standards of another. Um, it's my deep conviction that the sins of any culture are the byproduct of trade-offs trade-offs and deals that culture has made to survive and balance the different interests within it. And it's just as arrogant to roundly condemn the compromises in another age or the compromises in another culture as it is to condemn the compromises in another family, simply because your family was different and you prefer the way your family was, and the way that family over there, which is in a different part of the country, different socioeconomic environment, different family history, different issues to deal with, because they didn't make all the choices that you and your ancestors did, they must be execrable while you are normal.
Absolutely. Well, Lovecraft, love him or hate him, he did change a lot about writing, and a lot of authors, I think, owe a debt to what he did.
Absolutely. And he's shockingly readable. The vocabulary level is way above what you'd expect out of contemporary fiction, but it's very, very readable. And if you find the polysyllabic nature impenetrable, pick up an audiobook, because a good audiobook
Oh,
reader will make Lovecraft sound like a song.
yes.
And it's so enchanting.
Because, like, as you mentioned, a lot of those words, those multisyllabic words, when you pronounce them correctly, it's like
They have a
watching
rhythm.
river flow over rocks. It
Yep.
just it entices you to go, wait a second. I
Mhm.
have listened
And
to some audio of Lovecraft, and you got to rewind it when you're like, hold on
yep.
a second, and you're like,
What
huh,
would your let's each give like our 2 or 3 favorite stories that people could start with.
oh, wasn't it the Darkness on the Doorstep? Um, Definitely the Call of Cthulhu. I actually
Mm.
wrote a story for a slug and snail based anthology, and I wrote the Call of Cthulhu because, so all the main characters were snails, and the creature they find ends up being a lawnmower.
Oh, nice.
you know,
Oh, that sounds like
we're all
fun.
gonna die. Anyway, but the Dunwich Horror. Oh my god.
Oh,
Oh,
yes.
oh god.
That's a
How
good
how
one.
can you? But it's so hard to like pick three. I mean,
Okay, I can pick 3.
okay.
The Music of Eric Zahn,
Yes, you did mention that one.
The Shadow over Innsmouth, and
Incredible reading.
and The Color Out of Space.
I'm gonna have to. I've got the book.
Ooh.
I've got the book. I'm gonna have to.
Oh,
I
that's
don't
a
think I've read
good
that one.
one.
Uh, I, I might hang up, and you know what? That's actually on the cover right there.
Nice.
In fact, yeah, 4 of the 6 that we mentioned are on the cover of the book. That tells you
Cool.
it tells you our tastes. All right, Dan. Well, until next time.
Yeah, where can people find your stuff, Jay?
Gosh, I have a trouble remembering. Oh, jrmurdoch.com. Where can they find you, Dan?
They can find me at jdsawyer.net, and both of us have many books that are tailored to a variety of different tastes.
Absolutely. I might not write Cthulhu-esque mythos often, but when I do, I have fun with it.
Mm-hmm.
All right, Dan.
And I have some Lovecraftian elements in my Suave Rob series, believe it or not.
I'm going to have to dip back in there.
All right.
All right, my friend.
Have a good one.